The air was thick with smoke, so dense it clung to my throat like a living thing, choking me with every breath. I was crouched behind a crumbling wall in the heart of Sarajevo, 1993. The Bosnian War tearing the city apart like paper in a storm. The crack of sniper fire echoed through the streets, sharp and relentless, each shot a reminder that death was never more than a heartbeat away. I clutched my medical kit, my hands trembling not from the cold but from the screams. Those piercing, desperate screams of a mother cradling her child, blood pooling beneath them on the shattered pavement. I wanted to run to her to do something, but the bullets kept me pinned, a coward in a medic's uniform. That night, I learned a truth so brutal it still haunts me. Mercy has limits, and sometimes trying to save everyone means saving no one. My name is Marco, and this is my story, not one of heroism, but a failure of choices that still claw at my soul. I was a volunteer medic, barely 24, thrown into a war I didn't understand in a city where neighbors turned into enemies overnight. What you're about to hear isn't just a memory, it's a confession, a secret I've carried for decades, one that could change how you see the cost of compassion in a world gone mad. Why did I keep running toward the gunfire when everyone else fled? What did I see in the eyes of those I couldn't save? And what truth did I uncover that night, hiding in the ruins that made me question everything I thought I knew about humanity? War doesn't just break bodies. It shatters the illusions we hold about ourselves. It strips you bare, forces you to face the fragility of life, the raw instinct to survive, and the terrifying reality that anyone can find themselves caught in its jaws. I wasn't a soldier, not even a doctor, just a boy with a bag of bandages and a heart full of naive hope. Yet in those moments I saw things that no one should see. Things that make you wonder if humanity is worth saving at all. If you're watching this, you're here because you want to know the truth, the unfiltered, brutal truth of what war does to a person. I'm asking you to hit that like button not for me, but so more people can hear these stories, the ones that governments and history books try to bury. Leave a comment below with the words, "I want to hear the whole truth of this story." By doing that, you're not just watching, you're joining a community that dares to face the raw reality of war, to listen to voices like mine that still echo in the silence. Thank you for having the courage to step into this darkness with me. What comes next is a story of a single night that changed me forever. A night of blood, choices, and a revelation so unsettling it might make you rethink what it means to be human. Stay with me because the truth is never what you expect. The night was a living beast roaring with the chaos of war. Sarajevo's skyline, once a patchwork of minarets and church spires, was now a jagged silhouette of ruins, lit by the orange flicker of distant fires. I was huddled in what used to be a bakery, its windows blown out, the smell of burnt bread mixing with the acrid sting of gunpowder. My medical kit was open on the floor, bandages and antiseptic bottles scattered like the toys of a child who'd fled in terror. I'd been in the city for 3 weeks, a volunteer medic with no real training, just a crash course in stitching wounds and a stubborn belief that I could make a difference. That belief was crumbling faster than the walls around me. It started with a low rumble like thunder rolling down the hills. Then the ground shook and a mortar blast tore through the street outside, so close the shockwave rattled my teeth. I pressed myself against the floor, heart pounding as dust rained from the ceiling. Outside, the screams began, high, jagged, the kind that cut through your soul. I crawled to the window, peering over the sill. In the moonlight, I saw her, the mother from my memory, kneeling in the street, her child limp in her arms. Blood soaked her shawl, dark and glistening, and her cries were a language of grief I didn't need to translate. "Pomazit," she wailed, "help," her voice breaking like glass. I grabbed my kit, my body moving before my mind could catch up. The snipers were out there, hidden in the shadows of the hills, their scopes trained on anything that moved. I'd seen what they could do. A man shot through the neck just for crossing the street to fetch water, a girl my age crumpled in an alley, her basket of bread spilling into the dirt. But I couldn't stay still. Not when that mother's cries were pulling at something deep inside me, something that refused to let me look away. I slipped out the bakery's back door, keeping low, my boots crunching on broken glass. The air was cold, biting at my exposed skin, but adrenaline burned through me. The street was a maze of rubble, overturned cars, shattered concrete, a child's shoe lying alone in the dust. I reached the mother in seconds that felt like hours, dropping to my knees beside her. Her eyes met mine, wide with desperation. and she thrust her child toward me. Molim vas, she whispered, please. The boy was maybe 6, his face pale, his small chest still. A shard of shrapnel had torn through his side, leaving a wound that oozed dark blood. I fumbled with my kit, hands shaking as I pressed gauze against the wound. But it was useless. The blood soaked through faster than I could work. I didn't know enough. Not about shrapnel wounds, not about pediatric trauma, not about anything that could save him. The mother was sobbing now, clutching my arm, her nails digging into my skin. Spasitiga, save him, she begged as if I were some kind of savior. I wasn't. I was just Marco, a carpenter's son who thought he could play hero in a war that didn't care about good intentions. The sniper fire started again, bullets snapping against the pavement nearby. I flinched, my body screaming to run, but I stayed, pressing harder on the gauze, whispering to the boy, hold on, you're going to be okay, even though I knew it was a lie. His mother's eyes never left mine, pleading, trusting as if I held the power to pull her son back from the edge. I didn't. His pulse was gone, his small body cold under my hands. I looked at her, my voice caught in my throat, and shook my head. She collapsed over him, her wails drowning out the gunfire, a sound so raw it felt like the world itself was breaking. I don't know how long I sat there, frozen, her grief wrapping around me like a noose. Another explosion rocked the street, closer this time, and I heard shouts. Other voices, other lives caught in the same trap. I wanted to stay with her, to say something, anything, but there was no time. More people needed help, and I was the only one there with a medical kit, however useless it felt. I stood, my legs shaking, and ran toward the next cry for help, leaving the mother and her son in the street. As I moved, I felt something shift inside me, a crack in the naive hope I'd carried into this war. I didn't know it then, but that night was only the beginning of a lesson I wasn't ready to learn. The cries pulled me forward like invisible chains, each one a desperate plea echoing through the shattered streets of Sarajevo. I stumbled over debris, my medical kit banging against my side, the weight of it a mocking reminder of how little I truly had to offer. The night air was alive with danger, sporadic gunfire cracking in the distance, the occasional whoosh of a mortar shell sailing overhead, landing with a thunderous boom that shook the ground. My breath came in ragged gasps, my lungs burning from the smoke and dust, but I couldn't stop, not after leaving that mother and her son behind. Their image was seared into my mind, her bent over his tiny body, rocking back and forth in silent agony now, her wails having faded into the night. I told myself I had to keep moving, that there were others who might still have a chance, but deep down, a voice whispered that I was just running from my own failure. I followed the sounds to a half-collapsed apartment building, its facade pockmarked with bullet holes, windows gaping like empty eyes. A faint light flickered from the basement entrance, and as I approached, the cries grew louder, multiple voices overlapping in a chorus of pain and fear. I ducked inside, descending steep, crumbling stairs into what had once been a storage cellar but was now an improvised clinic, a sanctuary of sorts amid the hell above. The air down here was thick, stale, heavy with the metallic tang of blood and the sour stench of unwashed bodies. Dim lanterns cast long shadows on the walls, illuminating a scene that would haunt my dreams for years to come. Dozens of people were crammed into the space. Men, women, children, some lying on makeshift pallets of blankets and cardboard, others propped against the walls, their faces pale and drawn. A few volunteers moved among them, their expressions grim, hands stained red from their efforts. I spotted an older man, probably in his 50s, with a stethoscope around his neck. Perhaps a real doctor, or at least someone with more experience than me. He glanced up as I entered, his eyes weary but sharp. "You a medic?" he barked, not waiting for an answer. "Good, we need hands. Over there, the man with the leg wound. Stop the bleeding before he bleeds out." I nodded, swallowing hard, and hurried to the indicated spot. The man was a soldier, or what was left of one. His uniform torn and filthy, his right leg mangled below the knee from what looked like shrapnel. He was conscious, barely, his breath coming in shallow pants, sweat beading on his forehead despite the chill. "It hurts," he muttered through gritted teeth, his voice accented with the rough edges of a rural Bosnian. God, it hurts so much. I knelt beside him, opening my kit with trembling fingers. The wound was gruesome, a jagged tear exposing bone and muscle, blood pulsing out in rhythmic spurts. Arterial, I thought, my limited training kicking in. I needed to tourniquet it fast. I grabbed a strip of cloth from my kit, once a clean bandage, now soiled from earlier use, and wrapped it tightly above the wound, twisting it with a stick to cinch it down. The man screamed, his body arching in agony, but I held firm, whispering apologies that felt empty even as I said them. "You're going to be okay," I lied again, just like with the boy. "Just hold on." As the bleeding slowed to a trickle, I cleaned the wound as best I could with what little antiseptic I had left, the liquid stinging my own cuts as it splashed. He grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "My name's Amir," he said, his eyes locking onto mine. "I have a wife. 2 daughters. Tell them I fought for them." I nodded, unable to speak, the weight of his words pressing down on me like the rubble above. But there was no time to dwell. Another cry pierced the air, a woman in the corner clutching her abdomen, her face contorted in pain. I moved to her next, leaving Amir to rest, or so I hoped. She was pregnant, I realized, with a sinking heart, her belly swollen under her blood-stained dress. "The baby," she gasped, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Something's wrong." It came too early. The shelling. I examined her quickly, my hands gentle but urgent. There was blood between her legs, too much, and her contractions were coming fast and hard. I wasn't trained for this, delivering a baby in a basement during a siege. It was madness. But what choice did I have? I called for help, and a couple of women nearby rushed over, their faces etched with the same determination I felt crumbling inside me. We worked together, improvising with what we had, clean cloths boiled in whatever water we could find, my scissors for cutting the umbilical cord if it came to that. The woman, her name was Aida, pushed through her pain, her screams echoing off the concrete walls, mingling with the distant booms of artillery. Ours blurred into a haze of effort and exhaustion. The baby came, tiny and blue, not crying at first. I rubbed its back, blew gently into its mouth, willing it to breathe. And then a miracle. A weak wail filled the room, and Ada sobbed with relief, reaching for her child. But the joy was short-lived. She was still bleeding, hemorrhaging, and my kit had no more clotting agents, no IV fluids to stabilize her. I pressed down on her abdomen, trying to stem the flow, but it was like holding back a river with my hands. The doctor from earlier appeared at my side, his face grave. "We don't have the supplies," he muttered. "No blood transfusions, no surgery here. She's lost too much." Ada's eyes fluttered, her hand weakly grasping mine. "Take care of her," she whispered, nodding toward the baby now wrapped in a scrap of blanket. "Promise me." I promised, my voice breaking even as I knew I couldn't keep it. She slipped away quietly, her hand going limp in mine, leaving me holding a newborn orphan in a world that had no mercy for the innocent. The basement was a microcosm of the war's cruelty. Every corner held another story of suffering. To my left, a young boy with a bandaged head whimpered for his mother, who lay still beside him, her eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. Across the room, an elderly man coughed violently, his lungs ravaged by the constant smoke and perhaps tuberculosis, with no antibiotics to treat him. The volunteers moved like ghosts, rationing what little we had. A few painkillers doled out to the worst cases, water sipped sparingly from shared bottles. The power had been out for days, the generator sputtering on fumes, casting flickering light that made the shadows dance like demons. As the night wore on, more wounded trickled in, carried on stretchers made from doors or limping with the help of comrades. Each one brought a new challenge, a new test of my crumbling resolve. I stitched a gash on a teenager's arm, the needle slipping in my blood-slicked fingers, the boy biting down on a rag to muffle his cries. I held the hand of a dying woman as she whispered her last words, confessions of love and regret that I carried like stones in my chest. And through it all, the shelling continued, the building shuddering with each impact, dust sifting down like snow, reminding us that safety was an illusion, Amir. The soldier I'd helped first called me back over at one point. His face was ashen, the tourniquet holding but infection already setting in, his legs swelling grotesquely. "You did good, kid," he said, his voice weak. "But you can't save us all. War doesn't work that way." His words hit me like a punch, echoing the doubt I'd felt since the street. I wanted to argue, to say that mercy had no limits, that trying was enough. But looking around at the sea of pain, At the lives slipping away despite our efforts, I began to wonder if he was right. The crack in my hope widened, threatening to swallow me whole. Yet even in that despair, moments of humanity flickered like the lanterns. A volunteer shared a morsel of bread with a child, their small act of kindness a defiance against the chaos. Strangers comforted each other, sharing stories of lost homes and loved ones, forging bonds in the darkness. I clung to those sparks, using them to fuel my weary body as I moved to the next patient and the next. But as dawn approached, filtering faint light through the grates above, a new sound intruded. A low rumble of vehicles, shouts in the distance. The siege was tightening, and with it our fragile haven was about to be tested further. I didn't know then that the worst was yet to come, that the choices I'd face in the hours ahead would force me to confront the true limits of mercy. But in that basement, amid the blood and tears, I was learning a harsh truth. In war, saving one life often meant condemning another, and the weight of those decisions was carving scars into my soul that no time could heal. The faint light of dawn seeped through the narrow grates overhead, casting pale stripes across the basement floor like bars of a cage we couldn't escape. The rumbling I'd heard grew louder, vibrating through the walls, a mechanical growl that set my teeth on edge. I paused mid-stitch on a young girl's forearm, her skin torn by flying glass from an earlier blast, my needle hovering as everyone in the room fell silent, listening. The doctor, whose name I'd learned was Dragan, straightened up from checking on Amir, his face hardening. "Tanks," he muttered, his voice low but carrying in the hush. "Or APCs. They're closing in." Whispers rippled through the crowded space, fear thickening the air like the smoke that still lingered from the night's fires. I tied off the stitch quickly, my hands steadier now from hours of practice, but my mind raced. We were trapped down here, a sitting target in a city under siege, and the sounds outside suggested our fragile sanctuary was about to be shattered. I moved to the stairs, peering up toward the street level, my heart pounding in my ears. Through the cracked door I could see shadows moving, figures in uniforms, rifles slung over shoulders, advancing cautiously down the rubble-strewn road. Serb forces, I guessed, pushing deeper into the Muslim-held neighborhood, their advance heralded by the clank of armored vehicles. Sarajevo had been under siege for over a year by then, the hills around the city bristling with artillery, snipers picking off civilians like game. But this felt different, more immediate, as if the war had decided to come knocking directly on our door. A shout echoed outside, harsh and commanding, followed by the sharp report of gunfire. Someone upstairs screamed, and then the thud of bodies hitting the ground. Panic erupted in the basement. People scrambled, gathering what little they had. Blankets, water bottles, the wounded trying to stand on shaky legs. Dragan barked orders, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Stay calm. We evacuate the able-bodied first, then the wounded. Marco, help with the stretchers." I nodded, grabbing one end of a makeshift litter where a man with a bandaged head lay groaning. But as we started up the stairs, a massive explosion rocked the building, closer than any before, sending chunks of concrete tumbling down. Dust filled the air, choking us, and I coughed violently, my eyes watering. The entrance was partially blocked now, rubble piled high, but we pushed through, emerging into the gray morning light. The street was a war zone. Smoke billowed from a nearby crater where a shell had landed, and bodies lay scattered. Civilians caught in the open, their attempts to flee cut short. The advancing soldiers were closer now, maybe a block away, firing sporadically at anything that moved. I helped carry the injured man to a side alley where a group of locals had gathered, whispering about escape routes through the back streets. But as we set him down, more shells whistled overhead, slamming into buildings with deafening blasts. Shrapnel whizzed past, one piece grazing my shoulder, a hot sting that made me yelp. Blood trickled down my arm, but I ignored it. There were too many others worse off. Back in the basement, the situation was dire. Ada's newborn wailed in the arms of one of the women who'd helped with the delivery, her tiny cries a heartbreaking counterpoint to the booming artillery. Amir was too weak to walk, his leg infected and fever burning through him. "Leave me," he rasped as I tried to lift him. "I'm done for. Save the others." I shook my head, refusing to listen, slinging his arm over my shoulder and half dragging him toward the stairs. Every step was agony for him, his grunts of pain piercing me like knives. Dragan was organizing the rest, prioritizing children and mothers. But the math didn't add up. There weren't enough able-bodied to carry everyone, and the streets were a killing field. As we emerged again, a sniper's bullet cracked against the wall inches from my head, showering me with brick dust. I ducked, pulling Amir down with me, his weight nearly toppling us both. "Go," he urged, pushing me away. "You can't save me, boy. Not like this." But I couldn't abandon him. Not after promising to tell his family, not after seeing so many slip away already. I hoisted him up again, staggering forward, my muscles screaming. We made it to the alley where the group was huddled, waiting for a lull in the firing. The woman with the baby pressed close, her eyes wide with terror. "Take her," she said, thrusting the infant into my arms. "I'm staying to help the others." I hesitated, the tiny bundle warm against my chest, her cries muffled by the blanket. How could I carry both? The decision was forced upon me moments later. Another shell hit nearby, the blast wave knocking us off our feet. Screams filled the air, and when the dust cleared, the woman lay still, shrapnel embedded in her chest, her eyes vacant. I stared numb, the baby still in my grasp. Amir groaned from where he'd fallen, his wound reopened, fresh blood soaking the bandage. Dragan appeared, his face smeared with dirt, helping another wounded man. "We have to move now," he said. "The soldiers are almost here." I looked back toward the basement. There were still people down there, the elderly, the severely injured who couldn't be moved quickly. Voices called out, pleading not to be left behind. In that moment, the limits of mercy crashed over me like a wave. I couldn't save them all. If I went back, I'd risk everyone in the alley, including the baby and Amir. If I stayed to help, we'd all be caught or killed. Tears blurred my vision as I made the choice, the hardest I'd ever faced. "We go," I whispered to Dragan, my voice breaking. We fled down the alley, a ragged group of survivors, leaving the cries of the abandoned echoing behind us. Each step felt like betrayal, the weight of those left behind heavier than any physical burden. The baby's wail seemed to accuse me, her tiny fist clenching as if in protest. We zigzagged through the back streets, avoiding the main roads where the fighting was fiercest. Gunfire chattered nearby, and once we huddled in a doorway as a patrol passed, their boots crunching on gravel, voices low and menacing. My shoulder throbbed, blood sticky under my shirt, but I pushed on, Emir leaning heavily on me, his breath labored. The city was a labyrinth of destruction, buildings gutted by fire, streets blocked by barricades of burned-out cars and furniture. We passed a playground, swings creaking in the wind, a stark reminder of the normal life that had been stolen from this place. Hours blurred as we pressed on, the group dwindling as some peeled off toward hoped-for safety with relatives or hidden shelters. Dragan led us to an abandoned warehouse on the edge of the neighborhood, its doors hanging off hinges, offering temporary refuge. We collapsed inside, exhausted, the baby finally quieting as I fed her a bit of watered-down milk from my kit. Amir slumped against a wall, his face gray, infection spreading unchecked. "You should have left me," he said again. But there was no anger in his voice, only resignation. I bandaged his leg as best I could, but I knew it was futile without antibiotics, without a hospital that wasn't under fire. As the day wore on, the sounds of battle faded slightly, the front line shifting elsewhere for the moment. But the reprieve brought no comfort, only time to reflect on the choices I'd made. The faces of those we'd left in the basement haunted me, their pleas replaying in my mind. Had they been captured, killed, or worse, left to suffer slowly? I cradled the baby, her innocent eyes staring up at me, and wondered if saving her justified the abandonment of others. Mercy, I was learning, wasn't infinite. It was a finite resource, doled out in agonizing increments, each decision carving away a piece of your soul. Yet even in that warehouse, glimmers of hope persisted. Dragan shared stories of other safe houses, networks of volunteers smuggling people out of the city. A young boy from our group offered to scout ahead, his small frame slipping through dangers we couldn't. We rationed our meager supplies, binding wounds, comforting the grieving. I held on to those acts, using them as anchors against the despair threatening to drown me. But as night fell again, the distant rumble of artillery reminded me that the war was far from over, and the lessons it had in store were only growing harsher. Night descended on the warehouse like a shroud, the darkness outside mirroring the gloom that had settled over our ragged group. The building was a cavernous relic from Sarajevo's industrial past, its high ceilings lost in shadow, walls lined with rusting shelves that once held machinery, but now served as makeshift beds. The air was musty, laced with the faint scent of oil and decay. a stark contrast to the blood-soaked chaos we'd fled. We numbered about a dozen now. Dragan, Emir, the baby I'd named Mira in a whispered moment of hope, a few children wide-eyed with trauma, and adults whose faces bore the etched lines of exhaustion and loss. I sat against a cold metal wall, Mira cradled in my arms, her soft breaths a fragile rhythm against the distant thud of artillery that never truly stopped. My shoulder wound throbbed with each heartbeat, a dull fire that I ignored, focusing instead on mixing another batch of watered-down formula from the scant supplies in my kit. Emir lay nearby on a pile of sacks, his leg propped up, the infection spreading like a dark web up his thigh. His fever had worsened, sweat beading on his brow, his eyes glassy when they met mine. "Water," he croaked, and I handed him a canteen. Watching as he drank sparingly, knowing our reserves were low, Dragan moved among us, checking wounds with the efficiency of a man who'd seen too much death to be fazed by it anymore. He'd found a hidden stash in the warehouse, some canned food, a few blankets, even a radio that crackled with static but occasionally picked up snippets of news from the outside world. "The UN is talking ceasefires again," he said, tuning the dial, but his tone held no optimism. We'd heard those promises before, empty words while the shells kept falling. As the hours ticked by, the group shared stories in hushed tones, a way to ward off the silence that threatened to swallow us. A woman named Selma, who'd lost her husband in the initial shelling, spoke of their life before the war. A small apartment in the old town, laughter over family dinners, dreams of children playing in peace. Her voice broke as she described finding his body in the ruins, unrecognizable except for the wedding ring on his finger. A boy no older than 10 recounted hiding in a sewer during a raid, the rats scurrying past as gunfire echoed above. Each tale was a thread in the tapestry of suffering that bound us, reminding me that my own pain was just one among many. I listened, adding my own fragments when pressed. The street where I'd failed the mother and child. The basement where mercy had slipped through my fingers like sand. But as the night deepened, doubt crept in like the chill seeping through the cracks in the walls. Mira fussed, her cries echoing in the vast space, and I rocked her gently, my mind replaying the choices that had led us here. Had I done right by leaving those in the basement? Their faces haunted me. The elderly man with the cough, the woman too weak to stand, their pleas fading as we'd fled. I could have gone back, carried one more, but at what cost? Emir's words from earlier echoed, "You can't save us all." Yet trying to accept that felt like surrender, a betrayal of the naive idealism that had brought me to Sarajevo in the first place. I was no hero, just a young man thrust into a nightmare, grasping at the illusion that my efforts mattered. Dragan noticed my turmoil, sitting beside me during a quiet moment. "You're thinking about them, aren't you?" he said, his voice gravelly from years of smoking, though cigarettes were a luxury long gone. I nodded, unable to speak. He sighed, staring at the flickering lantern we'd lit for warmth. "I've been in this since the start. Seen medics burn out, break down. The key is triage, not just for bodies, but for your soul. Save who you can, mourn the rest, and keep going. Otherwise, the war wins." His words were meant to comfort, but they only deepened the ache. Triage meant choosing, and each choice left a scar. I looked at Mira, her tiny hand wrapped around my finger, and wondered if she was worth the lives we'd abandoned. The thought shamed me, but in the raw honesty of exhaustion, it persisted. The radio sputtered to life again. A voice in broken English reporting advances by the besieging forces. Neighborhoods falling, civilians trapped. Selma wept quietly, clutching a rosary, her faith a slender thread in the darkness. The boy, whose name was Ivo, drew pictures in the dust, stick figures running from explosions, a child's attempt to make sense of horror. I tended to Emir, changing his bandage, the wound festering, pus mingling with blood. "Amputate if you have to," he joked weakly, but his eyes held fear. I had no tools for that. No anesthesia, just prayers that infection wouldn't claim him before we found help. Dragan mentioned a smuggling route out of the city, whispers of tunnels under the airport runway, but reaching it meant crossing contested ground, a gamble with lives already hanging by threads. As midnight approached, a new sound intruded, the creak of the warehouse door, faint but unmistakable. We froze, hearts racing as footsteps echoed softly. Dragan signaled for silence, grabbing a rusted pipe as a weapon. I set Mira down gently, picking up a shard of metal, my body tense. Shadows moved in the entrance, and then a voice called out in Bosnian. "Friends? We're friends." Two figures emerged, a man and a woman, both gaunt and dirt-streaked, carrying backpacks. They were part of the resistance, scouts checking abandoned buildings for supplies or stragglers. Relief washed over us, but it was short-lived. They brought news. The soldiers were sweeping the area, house by house, executing suspected fighters and herding civilians into camps. "You can't stay here," the man said. "They'll be here by dawn." Panic stirred again, but Dragon kept us focused. We gathered what we could: food, water, the wounded on improvised stretchers. The scouts offered to guide us to a safer hideout, a network of cellars connected by old sewer lines. As we prepared to move, Emir grabbed my arm. "If I slow you down, leave me, promise." I shook my head, but his gaze was insistent. "For the baby. For the others." I relented, the promise tasting like ash. We slipped out into the night, the scouts leading. Our group a silent procession through the blackened streets. Moonlight filtered through clouds, casting eerie glows on the ruins, and every shadow seemed to hide a threat. The journey was torturous. We navigated alleys clogged with debris, pausing at each intersection to listen for patrols. Once, headlights swept nearby, and we pressed into a doorway, holding our breath as a truck rumbled past. Soldiers laughing in the cab. Ivo clung to my leg, his small body trembling, and I whispered reassurances I barely believed. Mira, mercifully, slept through most of it, her weight a constant reminder of the innocence we fought to protect. Emir struggled, his steps faltering, but he pushed on, leaning on me and Dragan alternately. The scouts moved with practiced stealth, avoiding sniper alleys, skirting minefields marked by crude signs. We reached the entrance to the sewers, a manhole in a forgotten courtyard, overgrown with weeds. The woman scout pried it open, the metal scraping loudly in the quiet night. One by one, we descended into the dank underworld, the stench of waste and rot assaulting our senses. The tunnels were narrow, water sloshing at our ankles, rats scurrying in the dark. Lanterns cast wavering light on slime-covered walls, and echoes amplified every drip and footfall. It was a labyrinth, easy to get lost in, but the scouts knew the way, marking turns with chalk. Hours underground blurred into a haze of discomfort and fear. Emir's condition deteriorated. He collapsed at one point, fever racking his body. We stopped in a wider chamber, Dragan examining him by lantern light. "Septic," he murmured. "He needs antibiotics, surgery." But there was nothing. I held Emir's hand as he deliriously muttered about his daughters, their faces in his mind's eye. "Tell them I love them," he said, echoing his earlier plea. I promised again, tears mixing with the grime on my face. We couldn't carry him further without risking the group, and the scouts urged us on. The soldiers might discover the tunnels. The decision tore at me. Leave him or stay and doom us all? Dragan met my eyes, the choice unspoken but clear. We made Emir as comfortable as possible, leaving water and food, a blanket against the chill. "I'll come back," I whispered. But he shook his head, a faint smile on his lips. "Go, Marco, save who you can." We left him there in the darkness, his labored breaths fading as we moved on. The guilt was a physical pain, sharper than my wound, a testament to the limits I was being forced to accept. Emerging from the tunnels at dawn, we found ourselves in a bombed-out suburb, the hideout a cluster of reinforced basements where other survivors huddled. Safety for now. But as I settled Mira in a corner, her eyes opening to the new light, the shadows of doubt lingered. Each life saved came at a cost, each act of mercy balanced on a knife's edge. The war was teaching me its cruel arithmetic, and I feared the lessons still to come. The hideout was a warren of interconnected basements beneath a row of shelled-out houses in Sarajevo's outskirts, a makeshift underground village carved from necessity and desperation. The air was damp and heavy, carrying the mingled odors of mold, sweat, and the faint, acrid tang of gunpowder that permeated everything in the city. Dim bulbs strung from exposed wires provided scant illumination, powered by a wheezing generator that hummed like a distant beehive. We'd stumbled into this refuge at dawn, our group diminished and weary, guided by the scouts who'd become our unlikely saviors. Around us, other survivors huddled in clusters, families clinging to each other, lone individuals staring blankly at the walls, their eyes hollowed by the unrelenting siege. Mira stirred in my arms, her small whimpers a reminder that life persisted even here, in the bowels of a city under assault. Dragan wasted no time, integrating us into the fragile community. This place has held for months, he explained in a low voice, leading me to a corner where medical supplies were stacked haphazardly on wooden crates. It wasn't much. Bandages scavenged from abandoned pharmacies, a few bottles of antibiotics smuggled through the lines, surgical tools that looked more like relics from a bygone era. But compared to the nothing we'd had in the tunnels, it felt like a treasure trove. I set Mira down on a blanket, her tiny form swaddled against the chill, and immediately set to work tending my own wound, cleaning the gash on my shoulder with antiseptic that burned like fire. The pain was a welcome distraction from the guilt gnawing at me over Amir, left behind in the darkness, his fate a question mark that tormented my thoughts. The sanctuary wasn't just a hiding spot. It was a hub of quiet resistance. People moved with purpose, women boiling water over small stoves for tea or soup, men repairing the generator or reinforcing barricades at the entrances. Stories circulated in whispers, the Tunnel of Hope, a legendary passage dug under the airport runway by civilians and soldiers alike, smuggling in food, weapons, and medicine from the outside world. I'd heard rumors of it before arriving in Sarajevo, but here, it was real. Scouts like ours used it to ferry supplies, risking their lives in the narrow, claustrophobic shaft that symbolized the city's unyielding spirit. One of the residents, an older woman named Fatima with a scarf tied tightly around her head, shared how she'd helped dig it, her hands calloused from months of labor. "We built it with our bare hands," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her fingers. "Spoons, shovels, anything. It saved us when nothing else could." Inspired by her resilience, I threw myself into helping. The basements housed the wounded from recent skirmishes, limbs shattered by shrapnel, burns from incendiary devices, infections raging unchecked. I assisted Dragan in treating them, my hands growing surer with each suture, each dose of precious medicine. There was a young fighter named Tarek, his chest wrapped in bloody rags from a sniper's bullet that had grazed his lung. He coughed wetly, blood flecking his lips, but his eyes burned with defiance. "They won't take the city," he rasped as I changed his dressing. "Not while we breathe." I nodded, administering a shot of antibiotics, praying it would stave off pneumonia in this damp hell. But the sanctuary's peace was illusory. As the day wore on, the distant booms of artillery grew closer, the ground trembling with each impact. Scouts returned with grim news. Serb forces were tightening the noose, shelling supply routes, snipers picking off anyone daring the open. Food was rationed strictly, a thin gruel of beans and rice, portions small enough to leave stomachs growling. Water came from a well in one of the houses above, fetched under cover of darkness to avoid detection. Ivo, the boy from our group, helped distribute it, his small size allowing him to slip through tight spaces unnoticed. He reminded me of the child I'd failed to save on the street, his innocence a stark contrast to the horror around us. In the quieter moments, the weight of my experiences pressed down. I thought of Amir constantly, wondering if he'd survived the night if someone had found him in the tunnels. The doubt from before evolved into a deeper introspection. Why was I here? A carpenter's son from a quiet village, volunteering for a war that wasn't mine, driven by a vague sense of duty and adventure. Now that naivety felt like a curse. Selma, the widow from our group, noticed my brooding and sat beside me, offering a cup of weak tea. "We all carry ghosts," she said softly, her eyes distant. "My husband, he was taken in a raid. I hear his voice in the shells sometimes." We shared silences more than words, a bond forged in shared loss. As evening fell, a crisis erupted. A new arrival staggered in, a woman clutching a child, both covered in dust and blood. The boy, perhaps 8, had stepped on a mine fragment while scavenging for wood, his foot mangled beyond recognition. Dragan examined it quickly, his face grim. "Amputation," he declared. "Or gangrene will kill him." The mother wailed, clutching her son, but there was no choice. We had no proper operating theater, just a cleared space lit by lanterns, ether from the supplies for anesthesia. I assisted, holding the boy down as Dragan worked with a saw that looked barbaric, the child's screams muffled by a rag. Blood slicked the floor, the metallic scent overwhelming. It was brutal, medieval, but necessary. When it was done, the boy lay pale and unconscious, his stump bandaged, his mother rocking him with tears streaming. That act shook me, but it also revealed the sanctuary's hidden strength, humanity amid barbarity. After the surgery, volunteers gathered, sharing what little they had. A song hummed softly, a story told to distract from pain. Fatima spoke of pre-war Sarajevo, its cafes and bridges, a city of harmony where Muslims, Serbs, and Croats lived as neighbors. War twisted us, she said, but we can untwist. Her words sparked something in me, a resolve to not just survive, but to preserve that spark of decency. I cared for Mira through the night, feeding her, changing her coos a counterpoint to the moans of the wounded. Yet danger loomed. Late that night, a scout burst in, breathless. "Patrol incoming," he gasped. They found tracks to the well. Panic rippled through the basements. Dragon organized defenses, barricades reinforced, the able-bodied armed with whatever was available, knives, clubs, a few pistols smuggled in. I hid Mira in a crate, covering her with blankets, my heart aching at the thought of leaving her. Ivo stood beside me, clutching a stick like a sword, his face set in determination beyond his years. The weight was agonizing, every creak and distant sound amplifying fear. Footsteps echoed above, voices muffled through the floors, Serbian accents searching. We held our breath, the generator silenced to avoid noise. A door upstairs banged open, boots thudding. They were close, probing for hidden entrances. Tarek, despite his wound, gripped a gun, ready to fight. I positioned myself near the main access, a shard of metal in hand, my mind flashing to all I'd lost and gained in this war. Minutes stretched like hours. Then, miraculously, the footsteps retreated, voices fading. They'd missed us, perhaps distracted by shelling elsewhere. Relief washed over, but it was tempered. We knew it was temporary. The sanctuary was fragile, its secrets vulnerable. As the group settled again, I returned to Mira, lifting her from the crate, her warmth a balm against the cold reality. That night taught me that mercy wasn't just in saving bodies, but in preserving spirits. In the face of limits, we found ways to extend them, through shared stories, acts of kindness, defiant hope. But as the artillery resumed its symphony, I sensed the twist yet to come. The war's cruel hand not done with us. The artillery's rhythm had become the heartbeat of our existence, each boom a punctuation in the endless sentence of survival. In the dim glow of the basements, as the echoes faded into a tense quiet, I felt a shift in the air, a subtle tension that prickled the back of my neck. The sanctuary, for all its resilience, was a powder keg of human frailty, where trust was as scarce as clean water. I'd been here only a day, but already the faces around me blurred into a mosaic of suspicion and solidarity. Mira slept fitfully in a crate I'd fashioned into a cradle, her innocent breaths a stark reminder of why I pressed on. Dragon had retired to a corner, snoring softly, his exhaustion a mirror of my own. But sleep eluded me. The ghosts of those I'd left behind, Emir in the tunnels, the abandoned in the first basement, whispered accusations in the dark. It started with a sound, faint at first like the scratch of a rat in the walls. I sat up, straining to listen, my body aching from the day's labors. The noise came again, muffled voices not from our group but from above, filtering through the floorboards. I glanced around. Most were asleep, but Tarek, the wounded fighter, met my eyes, his hand instinctively reaching for the pistol at his side. He nodded silently, and together we crept toward the ladder leading to the house ruins overhead. The air grew colder as we ascended, the stench of rot giving way to the crisp night chill. Peering through a crack in the boarded window, we saw them, shadows moving in the courtyard. Two figures huddled close, whispering urgently. One was Fatima, the older woman who'd shared stories of the tunnel digs, her scarf silhouetted against the moonlight. The other was a man I didn't recognize, tall, cloaked in a dark coat, his face obscured. They spoke in low tones, Bosnian words clipped and hurried. I caught fragments. Supplies, tomorrow, signal. Tarek tensed beside me, his breath shallow. Spy, he mouthed, and I shrugged, my heart racing. In a city torn by ethnic lines, betrayal was a constant shadow. Neighbors turning on neighbors, information sold for a loaf of bread or a promise of safety. Fatima had seemed genuine, her calloused hands testament to her labors. But war twisted loyalties like metal in a forge. We watched as the man handed her something small, a package, perhaps food or medicine, before slipping away into the night. Fatima glanced around, then tucked it into her scarf and headed back toward the entrance. Tarek wanted to confront her immediately, his fighter's instinct itching for action, but I held him back. Wait, I whispered. We need to know more. Descending quietly, we returned to the basement where I woke Dragan with a gentle shake. His eyes snapped open, alert despite the fatigue. I relayed what we'd seen and his face darkened. "Could be a contact for the tunnel," he murmured. "Or worse. We've had infiltrators before. Fed info to the snipers, led raids right to us." The uncertainty gnawed at me as we kept watch through the night. I tended to the wounded to distract myself, checking Tarek's chest wound, which was healing slowly under the antibiotics. He grumbled about being sidelined, his defiance a spark in the gloom. Ivo, the boy, curled up nearby, murmuring in his sleep about his lost family. Selma sang a soft lullaby to Mira when she fussed, her voice a fragile thread of normalcy. But my mind raced. If Fatima was a betrayer, our sanctuary could crumble by morning. I recalled stories I'd heard upon arriving in Sarajevo, of massacres in safe houses, entire groups rounded up because of one loose tongue. Mercy, I thought bitterly, extended even to suspicion. Accuse wrongly and you shatter the fragile trust holding us together. Dawn brought no immediate answers. The group stirred, rationing breakfast, a watery porridge that did little to fill the void in our stomachs. Fatima moved among us, helping distribute portions, her expression unchanged, kind even. I watched her closely, searching for signs. A nervous glance, a hurried movement, but found none. Dragan pulled me aside mid-morning as scouts prepared for a supply run. "We tailor," he said. "Next meeting." I agreed, the decision weighing heavy. Leaving Mira with Selma, I joined a small team venturing out, ostensibly to forage, but really to observe. The streets above were a desolate wasteland, buildings skeletal under the gray sky, wind whistling through gaps like mournful ghosts. We moved cautiously, avoiding sniper alleys, our boots silent on the rubble. Fatima slipped out later, claiming to check the well, and we followed at a distance, hearts pounding. She wound through back alleys, pausing at corners, her path deliberate. Finally, she entered a ruined church, its steeple toppled, stained glass shattered into colorful shards on the ground. Tarek and I circled around, finding a vantage point through a broken wall. Inside, the man from the night before waited, his face visible now, scarred, with a beard streaked gray. They embraced briefly, not like lovers but kin. "Brother," she said, confirming my hunch. He handed her another package, whispering about movements of troops, safe passages. "The tunnel's compromised," he said, his voice carrying faintly. "They're planting mines. Use the old route instead." My breath caught. Was this aid or deception? Tarek shifted, ready to intervene, but then the man added, "Our people in the hills send this. Medicine, food. For the children." Fatima nodded, tears in her eyes. "Thank you." "The siege. It's breaking us." Relief flooded me, mixed with shame for doubting. Her brother was a defector perhaps, or a sympathizer risking everything to help from the other side. Mercy had limits, but so did paranoia. In war, alliances formed in the unlikeliest places. We retreated silently, reporting back to Dragan. "Allie," I said, and he nodded, a rare smile cracking his weary face. "Good. We need more like her." The revelation shifted something in me, a reminder that humanity persisted in gray areas, not black and white. But the day wasn't done with twists. As we returned, artillery intensified, shells whistling closer. One struck nearby, the blast shaking the ground, dust cascading from the ceilings below. We rushed back to the basements, finding chaos, people scrambling, the wounded crying out. Mira wailed, and I scooped her up, soothing her as best I could. Then a scout burst in, face ashen. "They're coming. Patrol spotted, heading this way." Whether by chance or tip-off, danger loomed. Dragan organized evacuation, directing us to the old route Fatima's brother had mentioned, a forgotten sewer line leading toward the tunnel entrance. We gathered essentials, helping the injured to their feet. Tarek insisted on walking, pistol in hand. Ivo carried a small pack, his bravery belying his age. Fatima led the way, her knowledge invaluable now that trust was reaffirmed. As we filed into the narrow passage, the booms above grew deafening, the earth trembling. Water sloshed at our knees, the stench overwhelming, but we pressed on, lanterns bobbing like fireflies in the void. Halfway through, disaster struck. A section of the tunnel weakened by bombardment collapsed behind us, rocks tumbling, sealing the path. Panic surged. Were we trapped? Fatima shouted directions, urging us forward to a side branch. We scrambled, Mira's cries echoing, my arms aching from her weight. Emerging into another basement, we found temporary safety, but the group was split, some still behind the collapse. Dragon counted heads, his voice steady but strained. "We dig them out," he declared, but the risk was immense. Noise could attract patrols, I volunteered, grabbing a shovel from the supplies. Tarek joined, despite his wound, and we worked frantically, sweat mixing with dirt. Hours passed, muscles screaming, but we broke through, pulling the stragglers out, bruised but alive. Selma emerged last, coughing dust, her lullaby voice hoarse. The effort bonded us further, betrayal's whisper silenced by collective survival. As night fell again in our new hideout, a similar warren but unfamiliar, I reflected on the day's lessons. Trust was a gamble, betrayal a shadow, but in extending mercy to doubt, we'd saved ourselves. Yet the war's twists hinted at darker revelations ahead, mercy's limits stretching thinner with each trial. The new hideout was a mirror of the old, yet alien in its unfamiliar shadows and echoes, a labyrinth of concrete cellars linked by narrow passages that snaked beneath what remained of Sarajevo's suburbs. The air hung heavy with the damp chill of underground living, mingled with the faint, persistent odor of sewage from the tunnels we'd traversed. We'd arrived battered but intact, our group a testament to the precarious balance of luck and resolve. Mira fussed in my arms as I settled her into a nook padded with scavenged cushions, her cries subdued by exhaustion. The day's events, the collapse, the frantic dig, the reaffirmed trust in Fatima, had left us all drained, bodies aching and minds reeling. Dragon tallied our numbers again, his voice a steady anchor. 13 souls, including the children, each one a fragile thread in the web of survival we'd woven. I leaned against the rough wall, my shoulder wound a throbbing reminder of the street where this nightmare had truly begun. The medical supplies we'd carried were spread out on a tarp, inventoried by Selma, her hands steady despite the grief that shadowed her eyes. Tarek tested his mobility, pacing gingerly, his chest wound limiting his strides but not his spirit. "We'll fight if they come," he muttered, checking the pistol's clip. Eva watched him with wide eyes, absorbing the warrior's resolve like a sponge. Fatima distributed rations, stale bread, and tinned fish from her brother's package. Her actions quiet but purposeful, the whispers of betrayal silenced by her proven loyalty. As we ate in silence, the distant artillery served as a grim soundtrack, each boom a question. How long until the next assault? Sleep came in fits, haunted by dreams of Amir's face in the tunnel darkness, his voice echoing pleas I couldn't answer. I woke before dawn, sweat-soaked, to find Dragan already up, poring over a crumpled map by lantern light. "The Tunnel of Hope," he said, tracing a line with his finger. "It's our way out. But reaching it means crossing open ground, sniper territory. The plan was risky. Wait for fog or nightfall, move in small groups, use the sewers where possible. But with wounded and children, it was a gamble that twisted my gut. Mercy demanded we try. Reality whispered of its limits. I nodded, committing to the scout role, my youth and relative health making me expendable in the cold calculus of war. As morning grayed the small vents overhead, a new arrival disrupted our fragile calm. A knock echoed through the entrance passage, coded 3 short, 2 long, signaling friend. The door creaked open, admitting a figure cloaked in shadows. A man in his 30s, gaunt and bearded, carrying a sack over one shoulder. He introduced himself as Luka, a deserter from the Serb lines, his accent thick but his eyes earnest. "I saw your tracks," he said, dropping the sack to reveal food, medicine, even ammunition. Suspicion rippled through the group. Another potential betrayer? But Fatima recognized him, vouching softly. "He's helped before. Crossed lines to warn us." Luka explained his defection. Tired of the atrocities, the pointless slaughter ordered by commanders safe in the hills. "I want out," he said. "Take me with you." Dragan interrogated him sharply, probing for lies, but Luka's details rang true. Troop movements, minefield locations, even a safe path to the tunnel. Tarek remained wary, hand on his weapon, but the supplies were a godsend. Antibiotics for infections, painkillers for the suffering. I administered a dose to a woman with a festering arm wound, her gratitude a balm against my doubts. Mira took to the formula we'd mixed, her health a small victory. Yet Luka's presence stirred unease. Mercy to a former enemy tested our humanity. "He could turn us in," Tarek whispered later. One radio call. I argued for caution but inclusion. Abandoning him echoed too closely my guilt over Ymir. The day dragged under the weight of preparation. We reinforced entrances, rationed water from a dripping pipe, shared stories to bolster morale. Ivo drew maps in the dirt, his child's imagination turning the tunnel into an adventure. Selma mended clothes, her needle a rhythmic counterpoint to the shelling. Fatima and Luca huddled, exchanging intelligence. Her brother had sent him, a link in a chain of quiet resistance crossing ethnic divides. It humanized the enemy, revealing the war's true villains: fear, propaganda, power-hungry leaders. I reflected on my own journey, from naive volunteer to this, weighing lives like coins, but tension built as afternoon waned. A scout returned bloodied, arm grazed by a bullet. Patrols were intensifying, rumors of a big push. "They're clearing the suburbs," he gasped. House by house. Panic flickered, but Dragan quashed it, accelerating the plan. We'd move at dusk using Luca's path. As we packed, disaster struck. An explosion nearby, not artillery but closer, shaking the walls. Dust rained and then shouts from above. "Come out! We know you're there!" Soldiers had found us, perhaps by chance, perhaps not. Gunfire erupted, bullets pinging off the entrance barricade. Chaos ensued. Tarek fired back through slits, covering as we retreated deeper. Dragan shouted orders. "To the back exit!" We grabbed essentials, helping the wounded. Mira wailed, clutched to my chest. Ivo tripped, scraping his knee, but I pulled him up. Fatima led, Luca at her side, guiding us into a side tunnel. Shells, grenades, exploded behind, the blast wave knocking us forward. Smoke filled the air, choking as we crawled through narrowing passages. A child screamed, separated in the confusion. Selma doubled back, grabbing her hand. We emerged into a ditch, night falling like a curtain. Luca pointed. That way, through the field. But spotlights swept from hills. Snipers' nests. We ran low, hearts pounding, the ground uneven with craters. Bullets whizzed, one striking the ground near Tarek, who returned fire. A woman fell, hit in the leg. I stopped, binding the wound hastily, urging her on. "Leave me," she begged, but I refused, half carrying her. Mercy or folly? The group splintered, some veering off. Dragan called to regroup, but in the dark, voices lost. Reaching a tree line, we huddled, counting, missing 3, including Ivo. Horror gripped me. The boy, my shadow, gone. "We go back," I insisted, but Dragan shook his head. "Too dangerous." "They'll be waiting," Luca agreed. "The tunnel's close. Save who you can." The words echoed Ymir's, a cruel refrain. Tears burned as I acquiesced, the breaking point cracking my resolve. We pressed on, Mira's way to anchor, the night swallowing our grief. The tunnel entrance loomed, a guarded shaft, but our codes got us in. Descending into the earth, the siege's roar muted, safety tantalizing. But Ivo's absence haunted, a limit I'd crossed, mercy sacrificed for the many. In that darkness I confronted the truth. War forced choices that scarred the soul. Revelations darker than any shadow. The tunnel of hope stretched before us like a vein pulsing beneath the skin of the besieged city. A narrow artery of earth and timber that carried the lifeblood of resistance in and out of Sarajevo. We'd descended into its maw under the cover of deepening night. The entrance, a camouflaged shaft guarded by weary sentinels who nodded us through with grim efficiency. The air inside was thick, earthen, laced with the sweat of countless diggers and the faint metallic tang of desperation. Wooden beams shored up the walls, creaking under the weight of the world above. Where the airport runway hummed with occasional planes, UN aid drops that did little to ease the stranglehold. Our group, now down to 10 after the chaos of the escape, shuffled forward in single file, lanterns casting elongated shadows that danced like specters on the uneven floor. Mira clung to my chest in a makeshift sling fashioned from a scarf, her warmth a fragile comfort against the chill seeping from the soil. Dragan led, his map committed to memory, whispering cautions about weak spots where collapses had claimed lives before. Fatima followed, her steps sure, Luca at her side with the sack of supplies slung over his shoulder. Tarek brought up the rear, pistol ready, his wound making each breath a labored effort. Selma carried a child on her back, the boy's arms wrapped tightly around her neck. The missing, Ivo chief among them, hung over us like a shroud, their absence a void that no words could fill. I'd scanned the darkness during our flight, calling his name in hushed urgency, but the night had swallowed him, leaving only guilt in its wake. The tunnel was a marvel of human ingenuity, dug by hand over months, stretching nearly a kilometer under the no-man's land between Bosnian-held territory and the free zone beyond. Wheelbarrows and carts had worn ruts in the dirt floor, used to ferry everything from flour sacks to weapons, even the wounded on stretchers. We passed markers, scratched names, dates, prayers, etched into the beams, testaments to those who'd traversed this path. One read, "For my son, lost in the hills," and I averted my eyes, the words too close to my own losses. The air grew stuffier as we delved deeper, oxygen thin, our breaths coming in shallow gasps. Mira whimpered softly, and I hummed a lullaby my mother had sung to me, the melody a thin thread connecting me to a world before war. Memories flooded in with each step, unbidden echoes of the night that had shattered my illusions. It wasn't just one night, really, but a cascade of moments building to this subterranean exodus. The mother in the street, her child's blood on my hands. The basement where choices had condemned the weak. Emir's fading voice in the sewers. Ivo's small hand slipping from mine in the field. Mercy, I'd learned, was a blade that cut both ways. Extend it too far and you bled out. Withhold it and you lost your soul. Luca's presence underscored that paradox. A former enemy, now ally, his redemption a mirror to my own struggles. Why help us? I'd asked him earlier in a quiet moment. Because I saw what we did, he'd replied, eyes haunted. Villages burned, children. No more. A low rumble vibrated through the tunnel, dust sifting from the ceiling, artillery above, or perhaps a plane taking off. We froze, hearts pounding, but it passed and we continued. The path sloped downward, water pooling in depressions, soaking our boots. Fatima slipped once, catching herself on a beam, her package of medicine clattering but intact. We shared water from a canteen, rationing sips, the liquid warm and metallic. Tarek leaned against the wall during the break, his face pale, sweat beading despite the cool. "Keep moving," he urged, though his voice wavered. I checked his bandage, seepage but no fresh blood. The antibiotics were holding, a small mercy in the grand scheme. As we neared the midpoint, the tunnel widened slightly into a chamber used for rest or exchanges. Crude benches lined the walls and we collapsed onto them, legs burning from the stooped march. Dragon pulled out a radio, static crackling as he tuned for signals from the other end. "Clear," a voice finally responded, tinny and distant. Relief rippled through, but it was short-lived. Selma spoke then, her voice breaking the hush. "What about the ones we left?" "Ivo, the others." Her question hung, unanswered at first. I felt eyes on me, the one who'd insisted on going back only to be overruled. "We survive for them," Dragan said finally. "Carry their stories." But the words felt hollow, a bandage over a gaping wound. Luca shared his own tale in that dim space, perhaps to fill the void. He'd been a teacher before the war, drafted into the Serb army, forced to man checkpoints where he'd witnessed executions, rapes, the systematic dismantling of lives. "I let some pass," he confessed, faked papers, looked away. But it wasn't enough. One night he'd deserted, crossing lines under fire, seeking atonement in acts like this, guiding refugees, smuggling aid. His story humanized him further, blurring the lines of enmity. Fatima nodded, her own losses, a son killed in the early days, mirroring his regrets. "We all have blood on our hands," she said. "The war stains everyone." Revived slightly, we pressed on, the tunnel ascending now toward the exit. The air freshened imperceptibly, a hint of the world beyond. But tension mounted with proximity to freedom. The final stretch was the most dangerous, patrolled above by both sides. A sudden shout echoed from ahead. "Halt!" We froze, lanterns doused instinctively. Dragan crept forward, returning minutes later with a whisper. "Checkpoint. Bosnian side. They're checking for spies." Luca paled. As a Serb deserter, he'd be suspect, perhaps executed on sight. The irony twisted like a knife, saved from one side, doomed by the other. Debate whispered fiercely. Tarek advocated turning him back. Too risky. Fatima argued mercy. He's one of us now. I thought of Emir, of Ivo, the limits I'd already breached. "We vouch for him," I decided, my voice firmer than I felt. Dragan agreed, and we approached together, hands raised. The guards, young like me, rifles leveled, demanded stories, papers. Luca spoke truthfully, his defection detailed, corroborated by Fatima's brother's network. Suspicion lingered, but a radio call confirmed something, perhaps a list of known helpers, and we were waved through, Luca included. Emerging into the night air was rebirth. The free zone sprawled before us, tents, aid stations, the hum of generators. Stars wheeled overhead unmarred by smoke, but joy was tempered. Medics swarmed, tending wounds, distributing food. Mira cooed at the lights, her future uncertain but alive. I reported the missing, search parties dispatched, but hope was thin. Dragan clasped my shoulder. You did what you could. Yet as I watched families reunite or grieve, the echoes of the lost resounded. Mercy had its limits, but in pushing them, I discovered a disturbing truth. Survival demanded sacrifices that forever altered the survivor. The night waned, dawn painting the sky in hues of promise and pain. We were out, but the war's scars burrowed deep, revelations waiting to unfold in the light of what came next. The free zone sprawled out like a makeshift city of canvas and hope. Tents flapping in the early morning breeze, aid workers bustling with clipboards and urgency. We'd emerged from the tunnel's embrace into this limbo. The siege's iron grip loosened but not forgotten. The sky lightened to a pale gray, stars fading as if ashamed of the horrors they'd witnessed below. I stood there, Mira still strapped to my chest, her tiny heart beating against mine, a rhythm of survival amid the cacophony of voices, relief, grief, commands barked in multiple languages. UN trucks rumbled nearby, unloading crates of food and medicine, their blue helmets a symbol of distant impartiality that felt mocking after what we'd endured. My legs trembled from the trek, my body a map of bruises and cuts, but the real pain was deeper, a festering wound in my spirit from the choices that had brought us here. Dragan clapped me on the back, his grip firm but his eyes shadowed. We made it, Marco, because of you. I shook my head, words failing me. Made it? At what cost? Ivo's face flashed in my mind, his small, determined smile as he'd drawn those dirt maps, his hand in mine during the run. Where was he now, captured? Lost in the fields, bleeding out alone? The thought clawed at me, Mercy's failure a bitter taste on my tongue. The medics descended on us, efficient and detached, checking for injuries, wrapping Tarek's chest in fresh bandages, administering shots to ward off infection. Fatima sat nearby, head bowed, murmuring prayers, Luca beside her, his deserter status earning wary glances but temporary asylum. Selma cradled the child she'd carried, tears streaking her face as she whispered lullabies that now sounded like dirges. I handed Mira over to a nurse, her expert hands checking the baby for dehydration, malnutrition. Miraculously, she was okay, resilient in ways I envied. She's strong, the nurse said, smiling faintly, like her rescuer. But I felt anything but strong. I felt hollow, the limits of my mercy exposed like raw nerves. As the group was herded toward a registration tent, I lingered, staring back at the tunnel entrance, a nondescript shed masking its vital role. Search parties, I'd been told, were being organized, but the front lines shifted like sand, making rescues suicidal. Dragan pulled me along. You can't go back. Not now. His voice held the weight of experience, but my heart rebelled. Mercy didn't end at safety's threshold. It demanded more, always more. The registration was a blur of questions, names, origins, losses cataloged like inventory. I gave my details mechanically. Marko Petrovic, 24, volunteer medic from a village near Zagreb, Croatian by birth but here for humanity's sake. They noted Mira as an orphan, her mother's name, Aida, added to a growing list of the dead. Luca's interrogation was longer, his Serb background raising flags, but Fatima's testimony and his intelligence on troop movements bought him time. As we waited for assignments, tents, food vouchers, perhaps transport out, I wandered the camp, the dawn's light revealing the scale of suffering. Refugees milled about, faces etched with the same hollow despair, families separated, limbs missing, eyes that had seen too much. A child played with a deflated ball, his laughter jarring against the moans from the medical tents. It was there, in the medical area, that the twist came, a revelation so sharp it nearly buckled my knees. I volunteered to help, my medic instincts kicking in despite exhaustion. The head doctor, a weary Frenchman named Pierre, welcomed extra hands. As I assisted with bandaging a fresh arrival, a man with shrapnel wounds from a recent shelling, I overheard a conversation that froze my blood. Two aid workers discussed recent captures. A group from the suburbs, including a boy. Snipers got some, but survivors taken to a camp in the hills. My heart raced. A boy? I interjected, voice hoarse. They turned, surprised. Yes, about 10, dark hair. Said his name was Ivo. Brave kid, kept asking for a medic named Marco. The world tilted. Ivo alive, but captured, in enemy hands. The aid workers had heard it from a released prisoner. Details sketchy but hopeful. They're negotiating exchanges, one said. UN involved. Hope surged, mingled with dread. I had to act. Mercy, that relentless pull, demanded it. I found Dragon spilling the news. His face hardened. It's a trap or wishful thinking. Going back means death. But Luca overheard, stepping in. I know those camps. Guarded but porous. I can help. His offer was a lifeline born from his own guilt. Fatima nodded. My brother, he has contacts. We can try. The plan formed quickly, recklessly. We'd use Luca's knowledge, sneak back via a smuggling route, not the tunnel. Too guarded now. Tarek insisted on coming, his wound be damned. For the boy, he said, eyes fierce. Selma stayed with Mira and the child, her strength anchoring the vulnerable. We gathered supplies stealthily. Bandages, food, a map Pierre provided under the table, his own mercy-bending rules. As dusk fell again, the night stretching eternal in my memory, we slipped out, hearts pounding. The free zone faded behind, the siege's shadow looming once more. The journey was hellish. We skirted patrols crawling through underbrush, the ground wet from recent rain. Luca led, his deserters' paths avoiding mines. Gunfire crackled in the distance, flares lighting the sky like false stars. My body protested, every muscle screaming, but Ivo's image propelled me. We reached the hills by midnight. The camp a cluster of barbed wire and watchtowers, floodlights sweeping. Luca pointed out weaknesses, a drainage ditch, lax guards on the night shift. I was one of them, he whispered. They drink, get sloppy. We waited for a gap, then moved. Tarek covered with his pistol, Dragan and I crawling under wire, hearts and throats. Inside, the camp was a nightmare. Prisoners huddled in tents, emaciated, eyes dull. We searched stealthily, whispering Ivo's name. A man pointed us to a corner tent. There he was, curled on a mat, bruised but alive, his face lighting when he saw me. Marco, he whispered, tears flowing. But as I reached for him, a guard stirred nearby. Panic. We grabbed Ivo, running low, but alarms blared, spotlights pinning us. Gunfire erupted. Tarek fired back, covering our retreat. A bullet grazed my arm, hot pain, but we pushed through the ditch, wire-tearing clothes. Luca dragged Ivo, Dragan supporting Tarek, who clutched his side, hit again. We fled into the woods, pursuers close, branches whipping faces. Hours of evasion, hiding in ravines until dawn broke and silence fell. We'd made it, Ivo safe, but Tarek? His wound was mortal, blood soaking through. He gasped, worth it. For the boy. We buried him shallowly, marking the spot, his sacrifice the ultimate limit of mercy. Back in the free zone, Ivo clung to me, his story tumbling out, separated in the field. Captured but resilient. The revelation hit. Mercy's limits weren't fixed. They expanded with courage, contracted with fear. But each extension cost dearly. Tarek's life, my innocence. As the sun rose fully, illuminating the camp's ordered chaos, I held Ivo and Mira, orphans of war, vowing to protect them. The night had ended, but its lessons etched eternal. In trying to save everyone, I'd learned that true mercy sometimes meant saving who you could, and living with the ghosts of those you couldn't. The dawn in the free zone broke with a clarity that felt almost cruel, the sun rising over the hills that had held us captive, casting long shadows across the tents and the weary faces of those who'd escaped Sarajevo's clutches. I stood there, Ivo's hand in mine, Mira bundled against my chest, watching as the world stirred to life. Aid workers distributing breakfast, children playing tentatively in the dirt, laughter mingling with sobs in a symphony of human resilience. But for me, that light illuminated not just freedom, but the profound scars etched into my soul. The night that had begun with a mother's cry in the street had stretched into an odyssey of blood. Choices and revelations teaching me a truth so visceral it still echoes in my quiet moments. Mercy has limits, not because the heart is finite, but because war is an insatiable beast that devours good intentions and spits out broken survivors. I think back to that first explosion, the smoke choking the air, the child's limp body in my arms. How naive I was. believing my medical kit could stem the tide of suffering, through the basements of despair, the sieges that tightened like nooses, the shadows of doubt and whispers of betrayal. Each step forced me to confront the fragility of compassion. Emir's sacrifice in the tunnels, Tarek's final breath in the woods, Ivo's rescue at the cost of others. These weren't just events. They were mirrors reflecting the human condition stripped bare. War doesn't just kill bodies. It assassinates illusions, forcing us to weigh lives on scales tipped by chaos. I tried to save everyone, but in the end I saved who I could, carrying the weight of the lost like chains around my neck. And yet in that unforgiving arithmetic, I discovered a disturbing resilience. The human spirit bends but doesn't always break, finding mercy in small acts, a shared story, a risked alliance, a promise kept amid the ruins. That night changed me forever, reshaping my view of mercy not as a boundless well, but as a flame to be guarded fiercely lest it consume you. I left Sarajevo not as the boy who'd arrived with dreams of heroism, but as a man haunted by the secrets war whispers in the dark, the hidden truths that compassion can be a weapon turned inward, that survival demands betrayals of the self, and that true humanity emerges not in grand gestures, but in the quiet defiance of carrying on. Years later, the echoes linger, in nightmares of abandoned faces, in the laughter of Ivo and Mira, now grown, reminders that life persists despite the darkness. But the question remains, unsettling and profound. If mercy has limits, what does that say about us, about the fragile thread of empathy that binds humanity in the face of annihilation? You've made it to the end of this story, and for that, I congratulate you. Not everyone has the courage to delve this deep into the abyss, to listen to a voice from the heart of conflict and emerge with eyes wide open. You're part of a select group, those rare souls who choose to confront the raw, unfiltered truth of war rather than turn away. It's no small feat, staying through the blood, the losses, the revelations that challenge everything we think we know about ourselves. Thank you for having the strength to walk this path with me. It means more than you can imagine. Now I invite you to share what this journey has stirred in you. Leave a comment below with the phrase, "This story changed the way I see war." Or if it resonates differently, adapt it to your truth. Perhaps this story revealed the true cost of mercy, or this testimony shook my soul. By commenting, you're not just sharing. You're marking yourself as one of the most committed followers, those who dive into the depths without fear. Your words help build a community of listeners unafraid to face the human condition in its most brutal forms. A network of hearts connected by the shared pursuit of understanding the chaos that shapes us. Together we keep these stories alive, ensuring they don't fade into the silence that war loves to impose. And please, understand the vital importance of sharing this video. Hit that share button. Send it to a friend, post it on your socials, let it ripple out. Every share brings these testimonies to more eyes, exposing the realities that powers and histories often try to bury under layers of forgetfulness and propaganda. These are the voices that reveal the hidden scars of conflict, the secrets that could alter how we approach peace, empathy, and humanity itself. By sharing, you become a conduit for truth, helping pierce the veil that shields the comfortable from the afflicted. Imagine subscribing to this channel as stepping into a shadowed archive, where the ghosts of war whisper their untold secrets directly to you, pulling you into a circle of seekers who refuse to let the darkness win. It's like binding yourself to a chain of lanterns in an endless night. Each subscription a link that illuminates the paths others fear to tread. Don't just watch, join this unique community, where we unearth the voices emerging from the rubble, the survivors whose stories unsettle and enlighten, reminding us that in understanding the horrors we forge a deeper humanity. Subscribe now and become part of those who listen to the echoes, who honor the lost by keeping their memories aflame. Keep watching these videos, my friends. Let them fuel your curiosity for the disturbing, the real, the profoundly human. In a world quick to forget, your attention is an act of rebellion, a commitment to remembering the fragility of life and the unyielding strength of the spirit. Stay with us, and together, we'll uncover more truths that war tries to hide. Until next time, hold on to that flame of mercy. Guard it well, for its light is what guides us through the darkest tunnels.